Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the massive viewport of the Imperial flagship Dominion's Edge, watching the last human colony ships disappear into the cosmic void. The sight should have filled her with despair, but instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Behind her, the mechanical whirring and electronic beeps of the Zinthri command bridge created a symphony of alien efficiency that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 3 months of negotiations. "Your species has accepted the terms," declared High Admiral Thektar, his voice carrying the satisfied rumble that all Zinthri displayed when they believed they had achieved total victory. His massive, crystalline form towered over Elena's human frame, casting prismatic shadows across the polished metal floor. "The Sol system belongs to the Empire now. Your people scatter like cosmic dust to whatever remote worlds will accept them." Elena turned slowly from the viewport, her diplomatic training keeping her expression neutral despite the magnitude of what had just transpired. The Zinthri Empire had indeed won, at least on paper. Earth was theirs. Mars was theirs. The asteroid mining colonies, the orbital habitats, the research stations around Jupiter's moons, all of it now flew under the crimson banner of the Empire. Humanity's cradle had been sold away in exchange for safe passage to distant stars, and a promise that human refugees would be allowed to settle on unclaimed worlds beyond Imperial space. "Yes," Elena replied, her voice steady. "The evacuation is complete. The last transport cleared the outer markers 20 minutes ago." The other members of the Zinthri command staff exchanged what passed for pleased expressions among their kind, subtle color shifts in their crystalline skin that spoke of satisfaction and superiority. For them, this moment represented the culmination of a flawless campaign. No massive fleet battles, no devastação orbital bombardamentos, no billions of casualties, just pure, calculated pressure applied at exactly the right points until humanity had no choice but to capitulate. Elena had to admit it had been masterfully done. The Zinthri had studied humanity for decades before making their move, learning every weakness, every cultural pressure point, every technological limitation. When they finally acted, it wasn't with overwhelming force, but with surgical precision. They had blockaded the system, cut off all trade routes, and made it clear that resistance would mean the total extinction of the human species. Faced with that choice, Earth's government had chosen survival over pride. "Your leaders showed wisdom in the end," Admiral Thektar continued, his tone carrying what might have been approval in a different species. "Many races choose to fight uselessly against the inevitable. The Karathi resisted for 40 years before they saw reason. The Blexnari held out for nearly a century, and look where it got them. Their homeworld is now a mining operation." Elena nodded politely, though internally she was running through the conversation she'd had with Earth President just before boarding the last transport. Sarah Chan had looked exhausted, aged by the impossible decision she'd been forced to make, but her eyes had held something else too. Something that Elena now recognized as determination disguised as defeat. "There's one thing I want to clarify before I depart," Elena said, pulling a small data pad from her diplomatic satchel. "The treaty we signed, I want to make sure we both understand its exact terms." High Admiral Thektar's crystalline features shifted slightly, the Zinthri equivalent of mild annoyance. "The terms are clear enough, Ambassador. Humanity surrenders all claims to the Sol system and agrees to permanent exile from Imperial space. In return, the Empire guarantees safe passage for all human refugees and promises not to pursue them beyond our current borders." "Yes, but there's a specific clause I want to read aloud, if you don't mind." Elena activated her data pad, the holographic display casting a blue glow between them. Section 12, subsection C. The human species agrees to relinquish all territorial claims within the Sol system and accepts permanent exile from all worlds currently under Imperial jurisdiction or protection. This agreement supersedes all previous treaties and diplomatic arrangements between humanity and any member species of the Galactic Empire. Correct, Thektar confirmed, though his voice carried a note of impatience. What of it? Elena smiled then, the first genuine expression she'd shown since boarding the ship. Just making sure we're on the same page. Because that wording is very specific, isn't it? All worlds currently under Imperial jurisdiction or protection. Not all worlds that may come under Imperial jurisdiction or all Imperial territory. The agreement is quite explicit that it only applies to territory you control right now, at this moment. The Admiral's crystalline skin began to shift to a deeper hue, a sign of confusion among the Zenthari. The distinction is irrelevant. The Empire will continue to expand, and your people will not be permitted to interfere with that expansion. Oh, I'm not questioning the Empire's right to expand, Elena replied smoothly. I'm just noting that our agreement doesn't actually prevent humanity from expanding too, as long as we don't encroach on territory you already control. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Elena could sense the sudden tension among the Zenthari crew, could see the way their crystalline forms had begun to shift toward warning colors. But she pressed on, her diplomatic training serving her well as she navigated the dangerous waters of what she was about to reveal. You see, Admiral, while you were studying humanity, learning our weaknesses, and planning your perfect conquest, you missed something rather important about us. You learned that we're adaptable, that we're survivors, that we'll choose life over pride when faced with extinction. But you didn't learn about what happens when humans get backed into a corner and forced to choose between surrender and total annihilation. Elena walked closer to the viewport, gesturing at the empty space where Earth's blue marble hung like a jewel in the cosmic darkness. When you first arrived in our system and made your demands, you probably expected us to fight. When we chose to negotiate instead, you assumed it was because we recognized your superior strength. You thought you'd broken us, made us accept our place as a lesser species ready to scurry away to the galactic rim with our tails between our legs. Are you suggesting this was all some kind of deception? Admiral Thektar's voice had grown dangerously quiet, and Elena could see the other Zenthari on the bridge moving into more aggressive postures. Not deception, no. Every human who left on those colony ships is a genuine refugee who genuinely believes they're heading into exile. Every signature on our treaty was authentic. Earth's government truly did surrender the Sol system to save our species from extinction. Elena paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the bridge. But you made one crucial error in your calculations, Admiral. You assumed that Earth's government speaks for all of humanity. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. She could see Thektar's mind working, trying to process the implications of what she'd just said. Around the bridge, other Zenthari were beginning to display the angry red colorations that preceded aggressive action. The colonial expeditions, Elena continued conversationally, as if she were discussing the weather rather than potentially starting an interstellar incident. They've been launching for over 2 centuries now. Generation ships, sleeper ships, even some of the faster-than-light vessels in the last few decades. Hundreds of expeditions, tens of millions of colonists scattered across thousands of light years in every direction. She turned back to face the Admiral directly, her expression still diplomatically neutral, but her eyes now holding a glint of something that might have been satisfaction. And here's the thing about human colonial expeditions, Admiral. They don't operate under Earth's authority. Each colonial fleet establishes its own government, creates its own laws, makes its own decisions about territorial claims and expansion. The treaty you just signed with Earth's government? It doesn't bind them at all. Admiral Thektar's crystalline form had gone completely rigid. Are you telling me that there are independent human governments scattered throughout the galaxy? Independent human governments, human military forces, human colonies that have been growing and expanding for decades, or even centuries without any oversight from Earth. Elena's smile had returned, and this time it carried an edge that would have been familiar to any human diplomat who'd ever had to deliver an ultimatum. Some of them probably don't even know that Earth exists anymore. They've been out there building their own civilizations, claiming their own territories, developing their own technologies. The implications were starting to sink in among the Zenthri command staff. Elena could see the color patterns shifting across their crystalline skin as they realized what this meant for their carefully planned conquest. They had defeated one human government, captured one star system, forced one species to accept exile. But they hadn't defeated humanity. They had barely encountered it. The Kepler colony was established in 2387. Elena continued, pulling up more data on her pad. Last we heard from them, they had 7 worlds under their control and were in contact with at least a dozen other human settlements in their sector. The New Geneva expedition launched in 2341 with instructions to establish a defensive perimeter around their chosen system and prepare for potential expansion. The Terra Nova fleet was specifically designed as a military expedition, carrying enough firepower to defend against hostile alien contact. Elena paused, pretending to scroll through more information while watching the Zenthri reaction. And those are just the ones that maintained regular contact with Earth. There are probably dozens of human civilizations out there that we've completely lost touch with. Some of them might be more advanced than Earth ever was. Some of them might have formed alliances with alien species that aren't part of your empire. Some of them might even have encountered your forces already and decided that the Galactic Empire represents a threat to human survival. High Admiral Thektar finally found his voice. This is impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected large-scale human expansion. We would have encountered these colonies during our own territorial expansion. Would you? Elena asked mildly. The galaxy is a big place, Admiral. Over 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone, and your empire controls what, maybe a few thousand systems? The mathematical probability of you encountering every human colony is practically zero, especially since most of them were specifically instructed to avoid contact with aggressive alien species until they were strong enough to defend themselves. She could see the Admiral's mind racing as he tried to calculate the implications of what she was telling him. The Zenthri Empire's expansion had been methodical and thorough, but they had focused primarily on resource-rich systems and strategically important locations. A human colony that chose to settle in a remote, low-value system might remain undetected for centuries. Even if what you're saying is true, Thektar said slowly, these scattered human settlements pose no significant threat to the Empire. They lack coordination, central command, unified technology. They would be defeated piecemeal if they chose to oppose us. Elena's smile widened. You really haven't been paying attention to human history, have you, Admiral? Let me tell you something about what happens when you scatter a species like humanity across the galaxy and then threaten their survival. You don't get a bunch of isolated, easily defeated settlements. You get what we call a really bad day for whoever picked the fight. She activated another section of her data pad, and a complex star chart appeared in the holographic display. Red dots marked confirmed human colonies, yellow dots indicated probable settlements, and green dots showed systems where human expeditions had been directed, but contact had been lost. Look at this pattern, Elena said, gesturing to the display. See how the colonies are distributed? They're not random. Each expedition was given specific instructions about where to establish fallback positions, how to create communications networks, what protocols to follow if they encounter hostile aliens. Even the ones that have lost contact with Earth are still following those protocols. The star chart showed a complex web of human settlements stretching across multiple spiral arms of the galaxy. Some were clustered in defensive formations around resource-rich regions. Others formed communication chains that could relay messages across vast distances. Still others occupied strategic choke points along major space lanes. The colonies that maintained contact with Earth have been sharing information for over 2 centuries, Elena continued. Technical innovations, military developments, intelligence about alien species they've encountered. Some of them have been preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. A major alien empire that views humanity as a threat to be eliminated. Admiral Thektar was studying the star chart with the focused intensity of a military commander recognizing a strategic nightmare. "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many what? How many humans are out there? How many colonies? How many military forces?" Elena shrugged. "Honestly, I don't know. Earth lost accurate count decades ago. Conservative estimates suggest at least 50 major colonial governments, probably a few hundred established settlements, and somewhere between 1 and 5 billion humans scattered across the galaxy." She paused. "But those are very conservative estimates." The bridge had gone quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. It wasn't the satisfied quiet of victorious conquerors anymore. It was the tense silence of military commanders realizing that their perfect victory might actually be the opening move in a much larger conflict. "And here's the thing that really should worry you," Elena said, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made her words more ominous than any shout could have been. "Every single one of those colonies, every human government, every military commander out there just received the same message from Earth's final transmission. They all know exactly what happened here. They all know that the Galactic Empire just forced humanity to abandon its home world under threat of extinction." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this just proves humans are a scattered, divided species that poses no real threat to imperial expansion. You're thinking that even if these colonies exist, they lack the unity and coordination to oppose an empire as vast and powerful as yours." Elena walked closer to Admiral Thektar, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at his crystalline features. "But you're forgetting something crucial about human psychology, Admiral. Something that your intelligence reports apparently missed despite all their careful study of our species." "And what is that?" Thektar asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Elena's smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of absolute seriousness. "Humans don't forgive. And we really don't forget. You just made enemies of every human government in the galaxy, Admiral. Every single one of them now knows that the Zinthri Empire views humanity as a species to be conquered and scattered. Every single one of them now has a very personal reason to ensure that the Galactic Empire doesn't expand any further than it already has." The implications of that statement rippled across the bridge like a physical wave. Elena could see the exact moment when each Zinthri officer realized what she was telling them. That their perfect, bloodless conquest had just triggered exactly the kind of united human response they had been trying to avoid. "You're bluffing," Admiral Thektar said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if these colonies exist, even if they choose to oppose us, they lack the military strength to threaten the Empire." "Do they?" Elena asked innocently. "How would you know? Your intelligence network just proved that it missed the existence of dozens or possibly hundreds of human settlements. What else did it miss? What technologies have they developed in isolation? What alliances have they formed? What military capabilities have they built up over centuries of independent development?" She gestured toward the viewport, where the empty space around Earth showed no signs of the human civilization that had thrived here just hours before. "You conquered one star system and displaced about 12 billion humans. Congratulations. You just notified the rest of human space that the Galactic Empire is their enemy. I wonder how many billions of other humans are out there and what they're planning to do about it." The silence stretched on, filled with the growing realization among the Zinthri command staff that their perfect victory might have been anything but perfect. Elena could practically see the calculations running through their minds. Probability assessments of human colonial strength, strategic evaluations of scattered defensive positions, logistical nightmares of fighting a species that could be anywhere and everywhere at once. "There's something else you should know," Elena said finally, breaking the tense quiet. "Something that makes this situation particularly interesting from a military perspective." Admiral Thektar had regained some of his composure, but Elena could see the wariness in his posture. "What?" The treaty we just signed doesn't just prevent humans from claiming territory currently under Imperial control. It also doesn't give the Empire any right to attack human settlements that exist outside Imperial space. Elena's smile returned, but this time it carried a predatory edge that would have been instantly recognizable to any human who'd ever dealt with a particularly skilled lawyer. In other words, Admiral, you just signed an agreement that officially recognizes the right of independent human governments to exist and expand freely as long as they don't encroach on territory you already control. You've essentially granted legal legitimacy to every human colonial government in the galaxy. The color patterns across Thektar's crystalline skin had shifted to deep, angry reds. That was not the intent of the agreement. Intent doesn't matter in diplomacy, Elena replied smoothly. Only the actual wording of the treaty. And the actual wording creates a very interesting legal situation. Any action taken by the Empire against human settlements outside your current territory would now constitute a treaty violation. She paused, letting the implications sink in, which means that if the Empire attacks any human colony, humanity would have legal grounds to consider the entire treaty void, including the part about staying out of Imperial space. Admiral Thektar was now displaying the deep crimson coloration that indicated extreme agitation among his species. You planned this, did we? Elena asked. Or did we simply negotiate the best deal we could get while being forced to abandon our homeworld? I suppose history will have to judge that. She turned back toward the viewport, where Earth hung silent and apparently empty in the cosmic void. But Elena knew better. Even now, automated systems were bringing the planet's infrastructure back online. Atmospheric processors were beginning the work of repairing environmental damage from 2 centuries of industrial development. Orbital facilities that had been powered down during the evacuation were coming back to life. Because that was the other thing the Zenthri had missed in their careful study of humanity. When humans were forced to abandon something, they didn't just leave. They made sure they could come back. I'll be leaving for the frontier sectors in a few hours, Elena said conversationally. There are a lot of human settlements out there that will want to hear directly from Earth's last ambassador about exactly what happened here. They'll want to know the precise terms of the treaty, the specific legal implications, and what options they have for responding to Imperial expansion in their regions. Admiral Thektar was silent for a long moment, his crystalline form rigid with what Elena could only assume was suppressed fury. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Are you threatening the Galactic Empire, Ambassador? Elena turned back to face him, her expression returning to the neutral diplomatic mask she'd worn throughout months of negotiations. Not at all, Admiral. I'm simply informing you of the current situation. The treaty has been signed, the evacuation has been completed, and Earth now belongs to the Galactic Empire. Everything has proceeded exactly according to your plan. She paused, her smile returning one final time. You just forgot one rule, Admiral. Something we learned from our own history of conquest and empire building back when we were a planet-bound species fighting among ourselves. And what rule is that? Elena's voice was steady and calm, but her words carried the weight of prophecy. When you force a species to choose between surrender and extinction, you better make damn sure you can actually deliver on the extinction part. Because if you can't, if even a handful of them survive and escape, then you haven't won a victory. You just made yourself a very powerful enemy. She gathered her diplomatic satchel and headed toward the bridge exit, pausing only to add one final observation. The human species just went from 12 billion individuals living in one star system to, however, many billions are scattered across the galaxy, all of them now united by a single, shared purpose, making sure the Galactic Empire regrets the day it decided humanity was a problem to be solved. Elena left the bridge of the Dominion's edge with the same calm dignity she'd maintained throughout the entire negotiation process. Behind her, the Zenthri command staff stood in stunned silence as the full implications of what they'd just accomplished began to sink in. They had won a perfect victory. They had conquered Earth without firing a shot, displaced an entire species without massive casualties, and added a strategically important star system to the Empire without the cost and chaos of a prolonged military campaign. And in doing so, they had just declared war on every human being in the galaxy. In the depths of space, far beyond the reach of Imperial sensors, the first of the colony ships transmitted Elena's final diplomatic message to the vast network of human settlements scattered across the stars. The message was brief, but it carried the power to reshape the balance of galactic civilization. The Zenthri Empire thought it had one, but humanity was about to teach them the difference between conquering a world and defeating a species. And that, Elena reflected as her shuttle departed for the Outer Rim, was a lesson the Empire would remember for however long it had left to learn it. The message reached the Kepler colony 3 weeks after Elena Vasquez's final transmission from Earth. Governor Marcus Chun received it during the morning briefing in his office overlooking New Geneva's sprawling industrial complex. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Elena's tired but determined face, and Marcus felt his coffee cup slip from suddenly nerveless fingers as her words sank in. Earth has fallen. The Zenthri Empire has forced complete evacuation of the Sol system. All human governments are now considered independent entities with full autonomy to respond as they see fit. Treaty terms are attached. Recommend immediate defensive preparations. Humanity is now at war, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Marcus stared at the frozen image of Elena's face for several minutes after the message ended, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he'd just heard. Behind him, his aide Colonel Sarah Martinez was already pulling up strategic assessments and colony defense protocols, her military training kicking in even as the civilian government was still absorbing the shock. Governor? Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but Marcus could hear the underlying tension. Sir, we need to convene the Colonial Council immediately, and we should send word to the other settlements in our sector. Marcus nodded slowly, forcing his mind back to the immediate concerns of leadership. The Kepler colony had been established 73 years ago by the UES Pathfinder, one of the early generation ships that had carried 15,000 colonists to this distant star system. Since then, they had grown into a thriving civilization of over 4 million people spread across 7 worlds and dozens of asteroid mining facilities. They had their own military, their own shipyards, their own diplomatic relationships with 3 alien species that the Zenthri Empire had apparently never encountered. They also had something that Earth had apparently lacked when the Zenthri arrived: time to prepare. Send the emergency signal to all council members, Marcus ordered, his voice gaining strength as he shifted into crisis management mode. Priority Alpha communications to all settlements in the local group. And get me Admiral Torres on the line immediately. 2 hours later, the emergency session of the Kepler Colonial Council was in full swing. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity, with representatives attending both in person and via quantum communication links from the outer colonies. The massive holographic display at the center of the room showed Elena's message playing for the 3rd time, followed by detailed analysis of the treaty documents she had transmitted. Admiral Rosa Torres, commanding officer of the Kepler Defense Fleet, stood at the presentation podium with the grim expression of a career military officer who had just seen her worst-case scenarios come to life. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is clear. Earth's government was forced to capitulate to prevent total human extinction. The treaty they signed specifically applies only to Earth's authority and the Sol system. We remain legally independent to respond as we see fit. Councilwoman Janet Williams raised her hand. Admiral, what do we actually know about this Zenthri Empire? Have we encountered them before? Not directly, Torres replied, activating a new section of the display. But we've been collecting intelligence on them for the past 15 years through our contacts with the hegemony species. The Zenthri control approximately 2,000 star systems across 4 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their military doctrine emphasizes technological superiority and psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. They prefer to defeat enemies through strategic pressure and overwhelming displays of force. She paused, her expression growing grimmer. According to our alien contacts, they've conquered 17 different species over the past 3 centuries. Their standard approach is to identify a species' homeworld, blockade it, and force surrender through the threat of total extinction. It's apparently been extremely effective. Governor Chen leaned forward in his chair. Until now, you mean? Exactly. The intelligence reports suggest that the Zinthri have never encountered a species like humanity before, one that had already established independent colonies beyond their homeworld's authority. Their entire strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that conquering or destroying the homeworld will force the complete surrender of the entire species. Councilman David Park spoke up from the civilian sector. So what you're telling us is that they made the same mistake every human empire builder made throughout our own history. They assumed that controlling the center meant controlling the whole system. Admiral Torres smiled grimly. That's exactly what I'm telling you, Councilman. And if human history has taught us anything, it's that empires who make that assumption usually don't last very long once their subjects figure out how to exploit it. The debate that followed was intense, but focused. The Kepler colony had been established by people who remembered the lessons of Earth's turbulent history, and their descendants had inherited both the knowledge of past mistakes and the determination not to repeat them. By the end of the 8-hour session, they had reached a unanimous decision that would have terrified the Zinthri command staff if they had been monitoring human communications. The Kepler colonial government formally rejected the treaty signed by Earth and declared the Zinthri Empire to be a hostile force threatening human survival. More importantly, they activated Protocol 7, the emergency military mobilization plan that had been developed decades earlier specifically for this type of scenario. Within hours of the Council's decision, quantum communication bursts were racing toward every human settlement in the known galaxy. The messages were brief and encrypted, but their content was revolutionary. Humanity was at war, and it was time to remind the galaxy why humans had managed to survive and thrive despite being one of the younger species to achieve interstellar travel. The response was faster and more coordinated than anyone had dared to hope. The New Geneva expedition, which had been established in a star system 600 light-years from Kepler, responded within 18 hours. Their message was characteristically blunt, understood, beginning immediate military production. Estimate 2 years to full combat readiness. Will coordinate with local human settlements for unified response. The Terra Nova Colony Group, which controlled a defensive cluster of 5-star systems along a major trade route, sent an even more aggressive response. Zinthri Empire has been identified as hostile force. Beginning immediate interdiction of Imperial shipping in our operational area. Recommend all human settlements begin asymmetric warfare operations. But it was the message from the far-reach colonies that truly demonstrated the scope of what the Zinthri Empire had stumbled into. The Far Reach was a loose confederation of human settlements that had been established by 3 separate colonial expeditions over the course of a century. They had grown into a formidable regional power with their own diplomatic relationships and military alliances. Kepler colony leadership. The message began, transmitted by Admiral Catherine Shaw, commanding the Far Reach Combined Fleet. We have received Earth's final communication and confirm activation of wartime protocols. Be advised that the Far Reach Confederation controls 47 star systems and maintains mutual defense agreements with 5 alien species, 3 of whom have had territorial disputes with the Zinthri Empire within the past 50 years. Admiral Torres had to read that message twice before the implications fully sank in. The Far Reach Confederation alone was larger than many of the species the Zinthri had conquered, and they were just one of dozens of human colonial governments scattered across the galaxy. There's more, Shaw's message continued. We have maintained contact with the deep survey expeditions launched in the 2440s. Those expeditions established colonies beyond the galactic rim and have been developing advanced technologies in complete isolation for over a century. Initial quantum pulse communications suggest they have achieved significant breakthroughs in both military and industrial applications. The message concluded with coordinates for a rendezvous point and a proposed timeline for coordinated military action that made Admiral Torres realize that humanity's response to the Zenthri conquest was going to be far more sophisticated than anyone had expected. The Zenthri Empire had studied Earth for decades before making their move, learning human weaknesses and cultural pressure points. But they had studied Earth in isolation, as if it were still the only human world in existence. They had completely missed the fact that human civilization had been evolving independently in dozens of different environments for over 2 centuries. Each colony had developed its own solutions to the challenges of survival and growth in alien environments. Each settlement had created its own military doctrines, its own technological innovations, its own diplomatic relationships. Some had grown into peaceful, trading civilizations that preferred negotiation to conflict. Others had become hardened military societies focused on defense and expansion. Still others had pursued scientific advancement and exploration beyond anything Earth had ever achieved. And now, for the first time in human history, all of these diverse civilizations were united by a single, overriding purpose: the defeat of an empire that had made the mistake of treating humanity as a single, vulnerable target. The next few weeks brought a flood of communications from human settlements across the galaxy, each message adding to the growing picture of what the Zenthri Empire was actually facing. The scope was staggering. The Arcturus Trade Confederation controlled a network of commercial routes that connected dozens of star systems. Their merchant fleet was easily convertible to military use, and their intelligence network had been tracking Zenthri expansion for decades. The Vega Research Collective had focused on scientific advancement and had developed weapons technologies that were at least a century ahead of Earth's final specifications. Their shipyard were small, but capable of producing vessels that incorporated breakthrough technologies in propulsion, shielding, and armament. The Phoenix Rise settlements had been established by military veterans and had spent their entire existence preparing for exactly this type of interspecies conflict. Their entire civilization was essentially a military force with civilian support infrastructure. The Olympus Group had developed advanced artificial intelligence systems and autonomous manufacturing capabilities that could produce military equipment at rates that exceeded anything in the Zenthri Empire's experience. And these were just the groups that were responding to the initial communications. Every week brought news of additional human settlements, colonial confederations, and independent civilizations that were joining what was rapidly becoming the largest military alliance in galactic history. 6 months after Elena's final transmission, Admiral Torres stood in the same briefing room where she had first announced Earth's fall. But the holographic display now showed something that would have given the Zenthri command staff nightmares: a comprehensive strategic assessment of human military capabilities scattered across the galaxy. Current intelligence suggests a minimum of 64 independent human governments actively participating in coordinated resistance operations, she reported to the assembled council. Combined population estimates range from 8 to 12 billion individuals, with approximately 15% of that number serving in military or support roles. Governor Chun studied the display with the satisfied expression of a leader who had just realized that his people were no longer the underdogs in an impossible conflict. What about actual military strength? Conservative estimates suggest over 4,000 combat-capable vessels of various classes, with new construction proceeding at approximately 200 ships per month across all participating colonies. More importantly, the technological diversity is extraordinary. Each colonial group has developed specializations that complement the others. Torres activated a new section of the display, showing detailed technical specifications. The Phoenix Rise colonies have perfected high-mobility strike tactics. The Vega Collective has developed shield technology that's virtually impenetrable by conventional weapons. The deep survey expeditions have achieved breakthrough advances in faster-than-light communication and navigation. When you combine all of these capabilities into a coordinated force, you get a military organization that's qualitatively superior to anything the Zenthri Empire has ever encountered. Councilwoman Williams leaned forward with interest. Have we had any actual contact with Imperial forces yet? Admiral Torres smiled grimly. 3 encounters so far, all in the outer territories where Zenthri expansion meets human colonial space. The results have been educational. The first encounter had occurred in the Sigma Draconis system, where a Zenthri survey fleet had attempted to claim a star system that the Terra Nova colony group considered to be within their defensive perimeter. The Imperial fleet consisted of 5 heavy cruisers and a squadron of escort vessels, more than enough firepower to overwhelm any conventional resistance. They had encountered 12 human ships that appeared to be lightly armed merchant vessels. The Zenthri commander had demanded immediate surrender and withdrawal from Imperial space, confident that the human vessels would comply rather than face destruction. Instead, the merchant vessels had suddenly reconfigured themselves into combat configurations that the Zenthri had never seen before. Modular ship designs allowed rapid conversion from cargo haulers to warships. Stealth technology made accurate targeting impossible. Coordinated strike tactics overwhelmed the Imperial formation before they could respond effectively. The entire Zenthri survey fleet had been destroyed in less than 20 minutes, with no human casualties. The second encounter had been even more devastating from the Imperial perspective. A Zenthri patrol squadron had detected what appeared to be a human research station in an unclaimed system. Following standard doctrine, they had approached to demand evacuation and territorial surrender. The research station had turned out to be a fully automated military manufacturing facility operated by the Olympus Group. It had defended itself with a swarm of autonomous combat drones that overwhelmed the patrol squadron through sheer numbers and coordination. But more disturbing from the Imperial perspective was the fact that the facility had immediately begun producing additional drones using materials for the destroyed Zenthri ships. The third encounter had been the most strategically significant. A major Zenthri fleet had attempted to blockade a star system that contained what they believed to be a single human colony. The blockade had been intended to demonstrate Imperial power and force human withdrawal from the region. Instead, they had found themselves facing the combined forces of 6 different human colonial governments, coordinating their defense through real-time quantum communications. The human fleet had been smaller than the Imperial force, but it had incorporated technological advances and tactical innovations from dozens of different colonial military traditions. The battle had lasted for 3 days and ended with the complete withdrawal of Imperial forces. More importantly, the human victory had been achieved through coordinated action between previously independent settlements, demonstrating a level of military cooperation that the Zenthri had thought impossible for a scattered, divided species. The strategic implications are clear. Admiral Torres concluded her briefing. Every encounter has demonstrated that human colonial forces are not only capable of matching Imperial military technology, but are actually superior in several key areas: coordination, tactical flexibility, technological innovation, and strategic mobility. Governor Chin nodded thoughtfully. And what about the political implications? Even more significant. Each victory has strengthened the bonds between human colonial governments and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated resistance. We're seeing the emergence of the first truly unified human government in history, not based on central authority from Earth, but on voluntary cooperation between independent equals. Torres paused, her expression becoming more serious. But there's something else, Governor. Something that makes our situation even more interesting from a strategic perspective. What's that, Admiral? We're not just fighting a defensive war anymore. The colonial governments have enough combined strength to actually threaten Zenthri territory. And some of them are starting to suggest that the best defense might be a good offense. The implications of that statement settled over the council chamber like a physical weight. The Zinthri Empire had conquered Earth expecting to face a broken, scattered species fighting for survival in the outer darkness. Instead, they had awakened something that was rapidly becoming powerful enough to threaten the Empire itself. And in the depths of space, beyond the reach of Imperial sensors, the true scope of humanity's response was still revealing itself. Colony ships that had been launched centuries ago were finally reaching their destinations and establishing new settlements. Deep space installations that had been dormant for decades were coming back online. Scientific expeditions that had been exploring the far reaches of the galaxy were returning with new technologies and new allies. The Zinthri Empire had thought they were removing a minor threat to galactic stability. Instead, they had created the greatest military alliance in the galaxy's recorded history. And that alliance was rapidly discovering that it had the power not just to resist Imperial expansion, but to challenge the Empire's very existence. In her private quarters aboard the colony ship Endeavor, Elena Vasquez received daily reports about the growing human resistance movement. Each message confirmed what she had told Admiral Thektar during those final moments aboard the Imperial flagship. Humanity's real strength had never been in any single world or government. It was in the species' ability to survive, adapt, and ultimately thrive no matter how far they were scattered or how impossible the odds seemed. The Zinthri Empire had just learned what every previous enemy of humanity had eventually discovered, that the harder you try to destroy humans, the stronger and more dangerous they became. And humanity was just getting started. High Admiral Thektar stood before the Imperial War Council in the grand chambers of the Zinthri homeworld, his crystalline form displaying the deep blue patterns that indicated serious contemplation mixed with growing concern. The holographic display surrounding the council chamber showed strategic maps of the galaxy, with red zones marking confirmed human colonial presence and yellow regions indicating suspected human activity. There was far too much yellow. Honored counselors, Thektar began, his voice carrying the formal tones required for addressing the highest levels of imperial government. The situation in the outer territories has developed beyond our initial projections. The human colonial presence appears to be significantly more extensive than our intelligence estimates suggested. Grand Chancellor Morthak, whose ancient crystalline form held the deep purple hues of supreme authority, leaned forward in his council seat. Explain the nature of this development, Admiral. When you reported the successful conquest of the Sol system, you assured this council that humanity posed no further threat to imperial expansion. Thektar's form shifted toward darker blues as he activated the first series of tactical displays. Honored Chancellor, our initial assessment was based on the assumption that Earth represented the center of human civilization and that forcing their government surrender would effectively neutralize the species as a strategic factor. This assumption has proven to be incomplete. The understatement hung in the air as the displays showed the locations of the 3 military encounters between Imperial forces and human colonial fleets. Red markers indicated Imperial losses, and there were far more red markers than anyone in the chamber had expected to see. In the past 6 months, we have confirmed the existence of at least 47 independent human governments operating in sectors that our expansion forces consider to be unclaimed territory. Thektar continued. These governments appear to be coordinating their activities and have demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our projections for a recently displaced species. Counselor Veldar, who oversaw Imperial intelligence operations, displayed the angry orange patterns of professional embarrassment. How did our surveillance networks fail to detect such extensive colonial presence? Our deep space reconnaissance has been operating in those sectors for decades. The human settlements appear to have been specifically designed to avoid detection, Thektar replied, activating a new series of displays that showed the ingenious methods human colonists had used to remain hidden from Imperial sensors. They established colonies in star systems that appeared to have low strategic value, systems with limited resources, minimal mining potential, or unusual stellar characteristics that made them unsuitable for most forms of development. The displays showed system after system where human ingenuity had turned apparent disadvantages into strategic assets. Colonies built inside asteroid fields that provided both raw materials and natural camouflage. Underground installations on tidally locked worlds that were invisible to orbital surveillance. Industrial facilities constructed inside the radiation zones of pulsars, protected by shielding technology that Imperial science had never developed. More concerning, Thektar continued, is the evidence that these human settlements have been active for far longer than we initially believed. Some of them appear to predate our own expansion into their regions by several centuries. They have had time to develop independent technologies, form diplomatic relationships with local alien species, and establish defensive networks that we are only now beginning to understand. Grand Chancellor Morthak's color patterns shifted toward the deep reds that indicated extreme displeasure. Are you informing this council that the Zinthri Empire has been expanding into territory that was already occupied by an undetected human civilization? Not occupied in the traditional sense, honored Chancellor, but influenced. The human colonies appear to have established a form of territorial claim based on what they call spheres of interest rather than direct occupation. They claim authority over regions of space based on exploration rights, defensive requirements, and resource extraction agreements with local species. Thektar activated another set of displays that showed the true scope of what they were facing. The galaxy map now showed vast networks of human influence stretching across multiple spiral arms, with communication relays linking distant settlements, and defensive pacts creating informal territorial boundaries that the Empire had unknowingly been crossing for decades. The legal implications are particularly troubling, continued Councillor Zethral, who served as the Empire's chief diplomatic advisor. According to Galactic law, species that can demonstrate prior claim to territory through exploration and peaceful contact with local inhabitants have legitimate grounds for territorial disputes. If these human settlements can prove they established presence before our own expansion reached their regions, the Empire could be legally classified as the aggressor in dozens of territorial conflicts. Morthak finished grimly. This would severely complicate our diplomatic relationships with neutral species and could provide justification for military action against Imperial forces. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zinthri Empire had built its power through careful application of overwhelming force combined with legal justification for their territorial expansion. Their standard approach was to identify unclaimed territory, establish imperial presence, and then demand that any local species either submit to imperial authority or evacuate the region. But if the territory wasn't actually unclaimed, if humans had been there first and had simply been too well hidden for imperial reconnaissance to detect, then the Empire's legal position became much more complicated. What is the current military situation? Asked Councillor Kethran, who commanded the Empire's strategic reserves. Admiral Thektar's form displayed the reluctant honesty of a military officer reporting bad news to his superiors. Difficult to assess with precision, honored Counselor. Human military doctrine appears to emphasize mobility, stealth, and technological surprise over traditional fleet engagements. Our forces have had 3 significant encounters with human colonial fleets, with results that were unfavorable to Imperial objectives. Define unfavorable, Morthak demanded. Complete tactical defeat in all 3 engagements, with total loss of Imperial vessels and no confirmed damage to human forces. The silence that followed was broken only by the subtle harmonic vibrations of crystalline forms shifting toward darker, more aggressive color patterns. The Zinthri Empire had not experienced military defeats of this magnitude in over a century. Their technological superiority and overwhelming numerical advantages had made them effectively invincible against every species they had encountered. How is this possible? Councillor Veldar asked. Our intelligence assessments indicated that human technology was primitive compared to Imperial standards. Their industrial capacity was limited. Their military forces were small and poorly equipped. Our intelligence assessments were based on observations of Earth civilization, Thektar replied. The colonial settlements appear to have developed along completely different technological pathways. Centuries of independent research and development, combined with the necessity of survival in harsh alien environments, has produced innovations that our scientists never anticipated. He activated a series of technical displays that showed captured recordings from the failed Imperial engagements. The Council watched in stunned silence as human vessels demonstrated capabilities that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. Ships that could reconfigure themselves from peaceful merchant vessels to deadly warships in a matter of minutes. Weapons systems that bypassed Imperial shielding through quantum manipulation techniques that Empire science considered theoretical impossibilities. Coordinated fleet movements that suggested real-time communication across interstellar distances. Most disturbing, Thektar continued, is the evidence that different human colonies have developed different technological specializations. Each settlement appears to have focused on specific areas of research and development, creating a diversity of capabilities that makes it extremely difficult to develop effective countermeasures. Are you saying that humanity has achieved technological superiority over the Empire? Morthak's voice carried a dangerous edge. In specific areas, yes. Overall, technological superiority is difficult to assess since we have encountered only a small sample of human capabilities. But the evidence suggests that the combined technological resources of the human colonies may exceed our own in several critical areas. Counselor Zethral leaned forward with the focused attention of a diplomat recognizing a strategic nightmare. Admiral, what is your assessment of the human colony's coordination capabilities? Are we facing a unified enemy or a collection of independent settlements? Both, and that may be the most dangerous aspect of our situation, Thektar replied. The human settlements appear to operate as independent governments with their own territories, resources, and military forces. But they also demonstrate the ability to coordinate their activities across vast distances when facing a common threat. He activated displays showing the communication patterns detected between human settlements in the aftermath of Earth conquest. Within weeks of our successful occupation of the Sol system, human colonies across the galaxy began coordinating their activities. They shared intelligence, coordinated military exercises, and began joint development projects. They are simultaneously independent and unified. They gain all the advantages of decentralized organization while maintaining the strategic benefits of coordinated action. The implications were staggering. The Zinthri Empire's military doctrine was based on the assumption that enemy forces would have centralized command structures that could be identified, targeted, and eliminated. Defeating an enemy meant finding their capital, destroying their fleet, and forcing their government to surrender. But how do you defeat an enemy that has no central government to surrender? How do you destroy a military force that exists as dozens of independent fleets, each capable of operating autonomously? How do you conquer a civilization that has no single homeworld or capital to capture? Recommendation, Admiral? Morthak asked quietly. Thektar's crystalline form shifted toward the colors of reluctant honesty. Honored Chancellor, I believe we face three possible courses of action. First, we can attempt to continue our current expansion plans and deal with human resistance as we encounter it. Second, we can pause our expansion and attempt to negotiate some form of territorial agreement with the human colonial governments. Third, he paused, his form displaying the patterns of someone delivering news that no one wanted to hear. Third, we can acknowledge that the conquest of Earth was a strategic error that has created an enemy capable of threatening the Empire itself, and we can begin planning for a defensive war rather than continued expansion. The council chamber erupted in discordant harmonics as multiple counselors attempted to express their shock and outrage simultaneously. The Zinthri Empire had not fought a defensive war in 3 centuries. The idea that a single species, one that they had apparently defeated just months ago, could force the Empire onto the defensive was almost inconceivable. Admiral, Morthak's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of absolute power. Are you suggesting that humanity poses an existential threat to the Empire? I am suggesting, Honored Chancellor, that humanity poses a type of threat that the Empire has never encountered before. We are not facing a single enemy with a single government and a single military force. We are facing an entire species that has evolved beyond our understanding of how civilizations are supposed to develop. Thektar activated the final display, showing the full scope of confirmed and suspected human presence across the galaxy. Every month brings evidence of additional human settlements. Every encounter reveals new capabilities that we didn't know existed. Every tactical engagement demonstrates that our standard military doctrines are ineffective against human strategic thinking. But surely, interrupted Counselor Kethran, numerical superiority must count for something. The Empire controls thousands of star systems and commands the loyalty of dozens of client species. Even if humanity has achieved local tactical advantages, they cannot possibly match our overall military strength. Can't they? Thektar asked grimly. Honored Counselor, our latest intelligence estimates suggest that human colonies may control or influence territories encompassing hundreds of star systems. Their combined population may exceed 50 billion individuals. Their industrial capacity is completely decentralized and therefore immune to strategic targeting. Their technological capabilities are advancing through parallel research programs that share innovations across the entire species. He paused, letting the numbers sink in before delivering the final assessment that he knew would reshape Imperial strategic thinking for generations to come. We are not facing a recently displaced species fighting for survival in the outer darkness. We are facing a mature, technologically sophisticated civilization that has been expanding and developing for centuries while remaining invisible to our detection networks. The conquest of Earth didn't defeat humanity. It simply revealed that humanity had already grown beyond anything we imagined possible. The holographic displays now showed the galaxy from a completely different perspective. Red zones marked confirmed human presence. Yellow indicated suspected settlements. And green showed areas where human influence was probable but unconfirmed. The amount of space colored in human indicators was roughly equal to the territory controlled by the Empire itself. Moreover, Thektar continued, the human settlements are now actively coordinating their expansion efforts. They are claiming new territories, establishing new colonies, and forming diplomatic relationships with alien species that we had planned to incorporate into the Empire. They are not simply resisting our expansion. They're creating an alternative to Imperial authority. Grand Chancellor Morthak stared at the displays for a long moment, his ancient crystalline form shifting through color patterns that indicated deep contemplation mixed with growing alarm. Admiral, in your professional assessment, what would be the likely outcome if the Empire continues its current expansion policies in human-occupied territory? War, Honored Chancellor. Not the brief, decisive conflicts we are accustomed to, but a prolonged, multi-front struggle against an enemy that can match our technology, exceed our tactical flexibility, and potentially outlast our strategic reserves. Thektar's form displayed the dark patterns of someone delivering a death sentence. The humans have spent centuries learning how to survive and thrive as a scattered species. They have developed social, political, and military systems specifically designed for exactly this type of conflict. We, on the other hand, have built our entire civilization around the assumption that overwhelming superiority would prevent serious military challenges. Are you recommending surrender? Counselor Veldar asked in disbelief. I am recommending that we acknowledge reality, Thektar replied firmly. The Empire succeeded against 17 previous species because those species were centralized, predictable, and ultimately weaker than we were. Humanity is decentralized, adaptable, and appears to be stronger than we initially assessed. He gestured toward the strategic displays one final time. Honored counselors, we conquered a single-star system and thought we had defeated an entire species. In reality, we conquered one small outpost of a civilization that spans half the galaxy. The humans allowed us to take Earth because losing Earth didn't significantly weaken them, but it taught them exactly what kind of enemy they were facing. And now? Morthak asked quietly. Now they know our capabilities, our tactics, and our weaknesses. They have had months to coordinate their response and prepare their defenses. They have demonstrated the ability to defeat Imperial fleets in direct combat. And, according to our intelligence sources, they're beginning to discuss offensive operations against Imperial territory. Admiral Thektar's final words sent shock waves through the council chamber that would reshape the balance of galactic power for centuries to come. Honored Chancellor, the humans are not planning to resist Imperial expansion. They are planning to expand their own territory at our expense. The species we thought we had defeated is actually preparing to conquer us. In the depths of space, far beyond the reach of Zenthry's sensors, the combined fleets of humanity continue to grow. Elena Vasquez, now serving as humanity's first galactic ambassador, reviewed daily reports from colonial governments across the galaxy. Each message brought news of new settlements coming online, new alliances being formed, new technologies being shared across the vast network of human civilization. The Zenthry Empire thought they had won when they conquered Earth, but they had actually lost the moment they forced humanity to realize its own strength. And now, as Elena reviewed the latest intelligence reports about Imperial fleet movements and defensive preparations, she smiled grimly. The Empire was about to learn the most dangerous lesson in galactic history. Never pick a fight with a species that has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of the human flagship Defiant Dawn, watching the real-time tactical displays as the largest military operation in galactic history unfolded across 17 star systems simultaneously. Around her, the combined command staff of the United Human Colonial Alliance worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals executing a plan that had been 2 years in the making. 2 years since Earth's fall. 2 years since humanity had discovered its own strength. 2 years of coordination, preparation, and technological development that had transformed a scattered refugee species into the most formidable military alliance the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Shaw reports successful completion of Phase 1 objectives in the Altair sector, announced Commander Rodriguez from the communication station. All Zenthry installations have been neutralized with minimal casualties. Local alien populations are requesting formal diplomatic recognition from the Alliance. Elena nodded, making notes on her diplomatic pad as she tracked the political implications of each military success. The human operation wasn't simply about defeating Zenthry forces. It was about demonstrating to the galaxy that the Empire was no longer invincible and that humanity offered a viable alternative to Imperial rule. Captain Martinez confirms successful deployment of Liberation Fleet Beta in the Vega sector. Zenthry administrative centers have surrendered without resistance. 3 alien species have formally requested Alliance protection from Imperial retaliation. The reports continued to flow in as Operation Homecoming, humanity's coordinated offensive against Zenthry territory, achieved objective after objective across a front that stretched across half the galaxy. But the most important target wasn't any military installation or strategic resource. The most important target was hanging silently in space, just a few million kilometers away from their current position. Earth. Ambassador Admiral Rosa Torres approached Elena's command station with the focused expression of a military commander preparing for the most significant moment of her career. Long-range sensors confirm that the Sol System defensive fleet is moving into formation around Earth. The Zenthry are preparing to make their final stand exactly where this all began. Elena turned from the tactical displays to look directly at Torres, seeing in the Admiral's eyes the same mixture of determination and profound emotion that she felt in her own chest. For 2 years, every human in the galaxy had been working toward this moment, the liberation of humanity's homeworld, and the final proof that the Zenthri Empire's perfect conquest had been the beginning of its own destruction. "What's our fleet strength?" Elena asked. "Combined Liberation Fleet Alpha consists of 437 vessels representing 18 different colonial governments," Torres replied with obvious satisfaction. "Every ship incorporates technological innovations from across the Alliance, and every crew has been training specifically for this engagement for the past 8 months." Elena studied the approaching fleet formation through the command center's main viewport. The human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not a unified armada built to a single design philosophy, but a coordinated collection of vessels that represented the full diversity of human technological development across centuries of independent colonial growth. Ships from the Phoenix Rise colonies moved with the aggressive efficiency of pure military design. Vessels from the Vega Research Collective bristled with experimental weapon systems and defensive technologies. The massive industrial platforms from the Olympus Group served as mobile shipyards capable of producing replacement vessels during the battle itself. But the most impressive aspect of the fleet wasn't its size or technological capabilities. It was the coordination between crews that had never worked together before, but shared a common training doctrine, common tactical languages, and common strategic objectives developed through 2 years of intensive alliance building. "What about the political situation?" Elena asked, shifting her attention to the broader strategic implications of what they were about to attempt. "Monitor communications suggest that the Zenthri Imperial Council is in complete political chaos," reported Commander Santos from the intelligence station. 3 counselors have called for immediate negotiations with the Alliance. 2 others are demanding total mobilization for a final war effort. The Grand Chancellor appears to have lost effective control over imperial policy. Elena smiled grimly. The political fragmentation within the Zenthri Empire had been an unexpected but welcome development. When faced with the reality of sustained military defeats and the collapse of their expansion strategy, the Empire's leadership had begun to fracture along the same lines that had destroyed previous galactic empires throughout history. "Any word from High Admiral Thektar?" Elena asked with particular interest. "Confirmed aboard the Imperial flagship Dominion's Edge in Earth orbit," Santos replied. "Intelligence sources suggest he's been arguing for immediate withdrawal from the Sol system and establishment of defensive positions around the Zenthri homeworld. His recommendations have been overruled by the war faction within the Imperial Council." Elena found herself feeling an odd moment of respect for the Zenthri admiral who had overseen Earth's conquest. Thektar had understood the implications of humanity's scattered civilization faster than his own government, and his strategic assessments had proven remarkably accurate. If the Empire had followed his advice and pursued diplomatic solutions instead of military escalation, the current conflict might have been avoided entirely. But the war faction had prevailed, and the Zenthri Empire had chosen to fight rather than acknowledge the new galactic reality. Now, they would pay the price for that decision in the most symbolically significant location possible. "Communication incoming from the Zenthri fleet," announced Commander Rodriguez. "Admiral Thektar is requesting direct dialogue with Alliance leadership." "Put him through," Elena ordered, settling into her command chair with the formal bearing of a diplomat preparing for a conversation that would reshape galactic history. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar crystalline form of High Admiral Thektar. But Elena immediately noticed that his coloration had shifted toward the darker hues that indicated deep fatigue and stress among the Zenthri. The past 2 years had clearly taken a severe toll on the Imperial commander. "Ambassador Vasquez," Thektar began, his voice carrying the formal tones required for official diplomatic communication. "I must congratulate you on the effectiveness of your species' military coordination. The Imperial Council has finally acknowledged that our initial assessment of human capabilities was inadequate." "Thank you, Admiral," Elena replied with diplomatic neutrality. I assume you're contacting me to discuss the terms of Zinthri withdrawal from the Sol system. In part, yes. But there's something more significant that must be addressed. Thektar's form shifted toward colors that Elena had learned indicated profound seriousness among his species. The Imperial Council has authorized me to negotiate a complete cessation of hostilities between the Zinthri Empire and the Human Colonial Alliance. Elena felt a moment of genuine surprise. After 2 years of refusing all diplomatic contact and insisting on military solutions, the Zinthri were finally ready to acknowledge the new balance of power. What terms is the Empire prepared to discuss? Complete imperial withdrawal from all territories claimed or occupied since initial contact with humanity. Recognition of the Human Colonial Alliance as a sovereign political entity with full territorial rights. Establishment of formal diplomatic relations and mutual non-aggression agreements. The offer was far more comprehensive than Elena had expected. It represented essentially complete capitulation by the Empire and recognition that humanity had achieved strategic victory across the entire conflict zone. But Elena also recognized that this was likely a last-minute attempt to avoid the total humiliation of losing Earth itself. If the Empire could negotiate withdrawal before the battle for humanity's homeworld, they could at least claim that their surrender had been strategic rather than being forced by military defeat. Those terms are acceptable as a starting point for negotiations, Elena replied carefully. But there are additional issues that must be addressed before the Alliance can consider a permanent peace agreement, such as reparation for the forced displacement of 12 billion human refugees, compensation for lost infrastructure and resources during the evacuation of Earth, and, most importantly, guarantees that the Empire will not resume territorial expansion into regions where human settlements or colonial governments have legitimate claims. Elena paused, then added the diplomatic phrase that she knew would force Thektar to confront the full scope of what his empire was accepting. The alliance requires formal imperial recognition that humanity's territorial claims predate Zinthri presence in approximately 40% of the regions currently considered to be imperial space. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the subtle harmonic vibrations of Thektar's crystalline form shifting through rapid color changes as he processed the full implications of her statement. "Ambassador," Thektar said finally, "are you suggesting that the Human Alliance considers nearly half of imperial territory to be rightfully human space?" "I'm stating that human colonial governments have documented proof of prior territorial claims in those regions, established through centuries of exploration, settlement, and diplomatic contact with local alien species," Elena replied with the calm precision of a diplomat delivering an ultimatum. "Claims that predate imperial expansion by decades or centuries in most cases. That would mean the Zinthri Empire has been illegally occupying human territory for most of its expansion history," Elena finished. "Yes, Admiral, that's exactly what it means." The holographic projection of Thektar went completely still as the full scope of humanity's legal position became clear. The Alliance wasn't simply demanding imperial withdrawal from recently contested territory. They were asserting legal authority over regions that contained some of the Empire's most important industrial and strategic assets. "The Imperial Council will never accept such terms," Thektar said quietly. "Then, the Imperial Council is welcome to explain their position to the Alliance fleet that is currently surrounding Earth," Elena replied. "But I should point out that continuing this conflict will not improve the Empire's negotiating position. Every day brings news of additional human settlements activating their military forces and joining the Alliance. Every engagement demonstrates that Imperial forces cannot achieve tactical superiority against human colonial fleets." Elena activated her own tactical displays, showing Thektar the real-time status of Operation Homecoming across 17 star systems. "Admiral, in the past 72 hours, Alliance forces have liberated 43 Imperial installations, accepted the surrender of 67 Imperial vessels, and received formal requests for diplomatic recognition from 12 alien species seeking alliance protection from Imperial authority. The mathematical trend is quite clear. The Empire is losing territory, resources, and political legitimacy at an accelerating rate. Meanwhile, the alliance grows stronger with each passing day as more human colonies come online and more alien species choose to align themselves with humanity rather than the Empire. Thektar studied the displays with the focused attention of a military strategist, recognizing the scope of a strategic catastrophe. What happens if the Empire chooses to fight rather than accept your terms? Elena's expression grew more serious. Then, the Alliance will complete the liberation of all human territorial claims, establish formal diplomatic relationships with every alien species seeking protection from Imperial authority, and continue expanding until the Empire no longer exists as a political entity. She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "Admiral, 2 years ago you conquered Earth and thought you had defeated humanity. Today, humanity is stronger than the Empire and growing stronger every day. The only question remaining is whether the Empire chooses to accept the new galactic reality through negotiation or through complete military defeat." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Alliance Fleet's tactical command. Admiral Torres approached Elena's station with the grim expression of a military commander delivering critical intelligence. "Ambassador, our scouts report massive Imperial fleet movements throughout Zinthri space. It appears the Empire is mobilizing every available vessel for a final confrontation." Elena felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "They're not going to negotiate." "Confirmed," Torres replied. "Intelligence suggests the Imperial Council has chosen to stake everything on a decisive battle. They're gambling that they can achieve a significant enough victory to force the Alliance to accept less favorable peace terms." Elena turned back to the holographic projection of Admiral Thektar, seeing in his crystalline features the resignation of a professional military officer who understood the futility of his government's final decision. "I try to convince them," Thektar said quietly. "I explained the strategic realities, the mathematical probabilities, the long-term consequences of continued military action. But the war faction believes that imperial prestige requires a glorious final battle rather than diplomatic capitulation. And you, Admiral? What do you believe?" Thektar's form shifted toward the deep blue colorations that indicated profound sadness among his species. "I believe that the Zinthri Empire died the day we forced humanity to choose between surrender and extinction. Everything since then has been the political equivalent of a death spasm." Elena felt an unexpected moment of sympathy for the enemy commander who had overseen her species' greatest defeat. Thektar had done his job with professional competence, but he had been trapped by his own government's inability to adapt to changing circumstances. "Admiral Torres," Elena said, turning to address her fleet commander, "please signal all Alliance vessels to prepare for final engagement, and send a message to every human colonial government in the galaxy." "What message, Ambassador?" Elena looked one final time at the blue marble of Earth hanging silently in the cosmic darkness, then spoke words that would be remembered throughout human space for generations to come. "Inform all human settlements that the liberation of Earth begins now. Tell them that humanity is coming home, and that the galaxy will never again mistake us for a species that can be conquered, scattered, or destroyed." The Battle of Sol lasted 18 hours and marked the end of the Zinthri Empire as a galactic power. When the final Imperial vessel surrendered, humanity had not only reclaimed its homeworld, but had demonstrated conclusively that the scattered refugee species had evolved into the dominant military force in the galaxy. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same diplomatic chamber where Earth's government had signed the surrender agreement that had triggered humanity's galactic war for survival. But this time, she was accepting the formal surrender of the Zinthri Empire and the transfer of administrative authority over 47 star systems to the Human Colonial Alliance. The ceremony was attended by representatives of 18 alien species seeking formal diplomatic recognition from the Alliance, and the holographic displays showed real-time images from across the galaxy as human settlements celebrated their species' transformation from refugees to galactic power brokers. But the most satisfying moment for Elena came when she activated the communication link that had been established with Earth's surface. For the first time in over 2 years, human voices were broadcasting from humanity's homeworld, welcoming the returning colonial fleets and beginning the great work of rebuilding the civilization that the Zenthri Empire thought they had destroyed. The Empire had thought it had won when it forced humanity's government to sign a surrender agreement and abandon Earth. But they had forgotten one rule that had guided human survival throughout their species' history. Humans don't stay defeated. They adapt. They evolve. They grow stronger. And when they come back, they make sure that no one ever makes the mistake of underestimating them again. The galaxy had learned that lesson, and it would never forget it. Humanity was home, and the stars belonged to whoever was strong enough and smart enough to claim them. As it turned out, that was humanity.